Welcome friends, in this video we're going to learn how to connect two different tables to a single grid view. And we'll talk a little about C#. I'll show you enough C# to do something somewhat practical. So, begin with a simple, empty website project as we've done before. Drag a grid view in and drop it. I've already got that done to save time on this. And this time, let's go here as follows. So, from the toolbox, let's add a connection first. So SQL data source. We'll make use of that. Click configure data source and then go through the usual process of connecting to a database as we've done before. Let me do that quickly. I wish this here would be faster, but oh well. There you go. And now we have SQL Express. As before, down below, choose a database. I'm going to use my DBase. Just click OK. Usual steps. We've got the connection string. Seen all of this. Next. We've seen that. Next. Give it a second here. And here you can just show whatever defaults come up. That's fine for our purposes. Just select all from customers. That's fine. Click next. Test the query and then just finish. So standard steps. That's why I went through them kind of fast this time. Now, I want to focus on something different in this video. First of all, notice that I'm not going to connect the grid to the SQL data source explicitly. We'll do it in a different ways programmatically using C# instead. So this is what I mean. Take a look. In a search toolbox, search box, so many boxes, type the following. So we're going to add a drop down. So drop and then left press, drag and drop. So drop a drop down list into the page. And then make sure you click where it says enable auto post back. That means the page will be sent back to the server for processing automatically whenever you interact with this drop down list. And then click on edit items. And imagine this is like a list of database tables. Okay, so I'm going to click add. And then on the right side where it says list item properties, in the text cell, I'm going to type, for example, orders. And then click add again. I'll leave this here for a second. And after that, I'm going to add the next one, which will be customers. Whatever one it is that you're using, and then just click add. So now if you look carefully over here at orders, look very carefully. You see it's got two things. Next to orders in the members panel on the left side, it says 0. That is the index, the location of that item. It's at index 0. And the customers there, as you can see, is at index 1. And the last bit, you can highlight it and just remove it. It goes away. So you can click the remove button to make sure it's highlighted first. Remember, orders at index 0, customers at index 1. Okay, close that. All right, let's take a look at what it is that we have done so far, and that will help us to motivate the next step. So remember, we have a grid view, but it's not connected. We have an SQL data connection object, an SQL data source object. We've configured to connect that to SQL Server. And now we've got a drop-down. Let me enlarge this. That says orders and customers, you see? And notice again, when I switch the items, look very carefully at the little page icon in the tab. It flickers for a second to indicate an action is being performed, you see? Sometimes slow, sometimes fast. But the point is, the page is getting sent to the server, processing and coming back. Let me close it. Now, we need to establish the connection between the grid view, the SQL data source, and the drop-down object. All three have to interact. That's the next stage in the process. And don't forget what I said at the beginning. The goal is to make a grid view that can connect to the customers table, or it can connect to the orders table. So it's dynamic in that sense. You can display information from different tables in a single grid view. All right, so what you're going to do is make sure your mouse is over the drop down. Once you see a little cross, and then just left double click on it, and it brings up this code behind the window that takes this shape. Now, I'm going to make this smaller first of all so everything fits nicely. And remember, this is not specifically a class on C#. I just want to show you some basic things that you can do. So first of all, this here is code that runs when someone makes a selection in the drop-down list. That's why over here, take a look, it says drop-down list _ selected index changed. And there are some highly technical details like these things here. We don't have to know about them for our purposes. That's best left for a more advanced C# class. I've got some like that already on this website. So the big idea that matters to us is the fact that when somebody interacts with the dropdown, this code that I've highlighted will be the code that executes. And by interact, I mean somebody chooses a different item. When you do that, it's called an index change. You see this? Remember, the first item is at index 0, and the second item is at index 1 in the list, in the drop-down list. So that's why over here it says drop-down 1, and then selected index changed. So this is what runs when that selected index is changed. I hope you've got that. Now, where do we even begin? There's so many places, so many possibilities. Well, that's why you have to take a class and learn some basic things. And what we are going to do is this. Well, the way I think of it is, what are the objects that we have? We have the grid view, we have the SQL data source, and we have the dropdown. We already know that this is the code that runs when I switch this index of the selected item. After that, let's see whether something will come up that's useful for the SQL data object. Okay, I'm going to say SQL data source, and notice it shows up here in IntelliSense. So I just selected. All right. So we have got that object. Now, what can we do with this? Well, if you want to see what you can do, you type a period, and you see what comes up next. Remember when we talked about schemas? You had the schema, the table, and the column. So you had a way of organizing all the tables, and then a table is just basically a way of organizing some columns together. It's a way of basically structuring your stuff. It's the same thing here. You type the name of an object, you type a dot, like that, and then you look at what else you can do. So remember, it will be useful if at least once you just scroll through this to see what's available. Some of these should be somewhat familiar based on our SQL, right? We had the insert command. We did that. All right. Some of these will be highly abstract, but what about this select command? Remember, we've been selecting, a lot of different stuff all the time. So let's just select that. So you can type your select command. You see, you can also do an insert command if you wanted to. Insert command, there's one of those, as you see. All right, let's see what else. Oh, and of course you can do an update command also. You can specify that, you see? And I bet you can also do a delete command. Let's take a look. And there's a delete command. There you go, you see that? So you can do regular queries, you can update, you can delete, and so on. All right, so I'm going to type here select command. And by command, they simply mean literally just type the following. Put double quotes, and then within the double quotes, run the SQL you want to run. So type the following. Select star from, and then orders. That's it. Easy. Just select everything from the orders table. And remember, this SQL data source 1.select command, remember, this is connected to our database. Right? Inside the database, we have the orders table, and that's why we can take this step here. But this isn't enough. This won't work. The next stage, what you've got to do is you got to take the grid view now. And how do I know that I should do this? Well, it's just practice and a lot of experimentation. A lot, believe me. And then data source, like that. And it says, gets access the object from which the data band control retrieves its list of data items. So you specify the data source next. Type data source. And what do you put after that? So you've got the Gridview object dot, and it's got the data source. This is a property. How do you set this, the data source on a Gridview object, so you can go find it? Well, if you think about the way we did it visually, we made the connection. Remember, a couple times in previous lessons, we visually connected the SQL data source object and the grid view. So now we're going to do it programmatically. That's pretty much the same thing. You just type SQL data source 1. That's it. See that? All right. So this is establishing the connection between the data source of the grid view and the SQL data source object that we added. Remember over here, you have the SQL data source object right there, and you have the grid view. So this line right here is needed to establish a connection between them so they interoperate in some fashion. All right, I'm going to add some comments. In C# to do comments, you put a //. Remember, comments are annotating the code, but they're not executable code. So I'm going to say line below gets query run, basically. That's how I think of it in simple English. And then line below establishes connection. Okay, so makes connection between the grid view and SQL data source object. And after that, you might think, well, this has got to be enough. Just hit Google Chrome for a second. And then you let this load, and then you observe the results, and you experiment that way to see whether it is enough. And as you do this, as you see, sometimes it will just spin. Again, just shut it down and try it again. Notice, look at the lower right-hand corner. You might see this IIS Express icon. Sometimes it doesn't shut down. So if you right-click on it, just exit. Okay, just make sure you exit that thing. All right, give it another go here. All right. So you've got the orders drop down, customers, go back to orders, and unfortunately nothing is working. So we need to continue, close this. All right, this is not enough. So the next stage, you need to take and need to generate some columns. So type this next, grid view, one.auto-generate columns and set that quantity equal to true. All right, so let's give this a run now with Google Chrome. Give it a second to load. All right, and you've got customers in orders and still nothing is showing. So close that again. There's one last step, which is this one. You got to type grid view, one dot, and then data bind. Like that. I have a mouse over data bind, and it says there, binds the data source to the grid view control. This method cannot be inherited. That last part of the sentence is not important for us, but what does count is that it binds the data source to the grid view control. Okay? And this is going to actually now cause the, binds everything together in simple English. All right, so let's give this a go. Hit Google Chrome and observe the results. All right, you've got the orders. Okay, switch to customers. Oh, look. All right, go back to orders for a second. All right, so we have one table. And now what we want to do is be able to switch between the orders and the customers table. So I'm going to close this. And to do that, we have to take the following lines. It's going to depend on the following. You're going to say if, and because remember the dropdown has two options, either the orders one or the customers one. Because of that, it's a good candidate for working with the if and else. I'm going to say if, and then you type the name of the object, drop down list one, and then dot selected index, and you're going to say equals 0. So what is this saying? This is saying if the selected item is at index 0, but remember index 0 in our case means the orders. Okay, remember that index 0 means orders like that. And now, because of the design of C#, all of this is a big block of code. You've got to place that within a set of curly braces. So we do that next. So you put an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. And then within these, you place this entire chunk of code. Okay. Obviously, this is something that, you have to learn to do. It's kind of hard to figure out, to be honest, on your own. Right? Helpful if you have somebody show you a little bit of it. Otherwise, it can seem like, how would you know to put the code together in this particular sequence? It's not easy. Experiment, experiment, experiment. All right. So it looks like that. Remember, this is saying now if you've selected the item at index 0, you execute this block of code. But remember, index 0 corresponds to the word orders or the orders table. That's why over here, if you look carefully, if I look at select star from orders, that's what I have there. I don't have customers there. All right. And now the other possibility is that somebody could select a second item, which then means that you're talking about the customers table. So to take care of that, I'm going to type else. And the beautiful thing is a lot of this can be copied at this stage. So Control C after highlighting it, put in the curly braces after the else, and then paste that in there. And the only thing that you really have to change, that's another beautiful part of all of this, is that remember this part right here, I'm going to add a comment, right? So block below runs when index 1 is selected, which is the customers table. So you just have to change where it says select star. So it says select star from customers. That's all. Just do that. And if you pause the video and you think about it, it's exactly the same as the code above, isn't it? That's the beautiful part of it. So remember, this is going to change the select command so we can reach into a new table. But after that, you set the data source on the grid view. You say true to auto-generate columns. And then at the end, to make sure everything binds together and works properly, just hit it with gridview1.databind. Databind is a method, so an action that the grid view can perform. That's what methods are. They represent actions. Auto-generate columns, we call that a property. It's a feature that the grid view possesses. It's not an action that it can do. It's something that it possesses, and you can set its value. So in this particular case, we just set it to true. Same thing with the data source. It's not an action that the grid view can perform. It's a feature that it possesses, a property that it has. Just like you have your eye color, your hair color, your height, your weight. Those are your properties. The grid view is an object, and it's got a data source property, and auto-generate columns is another one of its properties. And the SQL data source is an object, and it's got a property called select command, and you can set its value. Data bind is an action, it's a method, it's a verb, it's something that you do. Having said all of that, let's take a look at the difference. So hit Google Chrome here, let it load. All right, so we've got orders, good. Switch to customers. We've got the ID, the customer name, and order ID. So this confirms that the table has been read and into the grid view. And now click on orders. And now it says order ID, item, quantity, and total. You see that? So customers, orders. It's working nicely. And even though it seems so complex, if you right click somewhere and you go over to view page source, or even inspect, I'm going to take this window here. Look at this window here for a second. I'm going to enlarge everything. And if you look through this, again, I know it's overwhelming, but some things shouldn't be. So first of all, notice that this is just HTML that's generated ultimately, you see? There's some JavaScript. All of this, thankfully, is done for us automatically. I'm not going to talk about it. I just want you to beware of it. That's all. Let me close it. All right, let me close the page. And this is our C# here. And that's it. So remember, make sure you have a grid view, an SQL data source object, a drop-down list. Make sure you also configure the connection to the database to the SQL data source object. And when you double click on the drop-down list, make sure it brings you right here. And then you type in this code as shown. I'm going to make this a bit smaller from top to bottom, like that. All right, that is it, friends. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next one.